I've had a number of people ask me what I carry in my first aid kit, and I've wanted to make a video kind of showing that. But the reason why I haven't until now is because it's a bit of a complicated answer. And what I mean by that is I actually carry a couple of different first aid kits depending on the activities that I'm doing, or I'm recreating personally, or I'm working and guiding. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through kind of each of those kits that I have and what I have in each of them. Just as a quick overview though, I'm going to show you kind of my various size kits that I have. So this one, which is just a Ziploc bag stuffed full with a bunch of different items. That's my personal kit. And then in here is my guiding kit. And so obviously you can see this one's a little bit bigger. But additionally, I also carry medication with me if I'm doing overnight trips. If I'm doing day trips, I won't bring those with me. And then depending on the time of year, I'll also carry some additional medication. So I've got an EpiPen as well as this topical Benadryl cream. And the reason why I don't always put this stuff into the rotation is the Benadryl cream I find anytime that I'm dealing with an elevated risk of wasps, so usually later summer. The EpiPen kind of for the same reason, you've got wasp out there, or you're with folks that have a known allergy. And so when I'm guiding, I'm usually bringing this EpiPen, but if I'm out with friends and none of them have an allergy, then I don't bring this with me. And then in addition to discussing my various first aid kits and what I carry, I also want to just kind of give you a little bit of an overview of kind of how I store my first aid supplies and also my kind of at-home first aid kit as well. This kit I'm not carrying on any backpacking trips. It's quite heavy, but I will bring this for different lodge trips. Anytime that I'm going car camping, anytime that I'm in, a wilderness environment, but I'm not hiking into that wilderness environment. So a great example of that is there's a lot of places that I just drive around this province that feel, and by definition are a wilderness environment. Really, the definition of a wilderness environment from a wilderness first aid perspective is something that's 40 minutes to an hour away from a higher level of care. So some sort of a hospital or a clinic environment. And honestly, I can think of huge chunks of the province of British Columbia that would include. So for my big kit, I've got things that I would never carry out in the backcountry with me. I've got a lot of extra items that I do carry in these smaller kits. So a good example of that is I've got kind of more Band-Aids, more gauze. This kit is kind of designed so that I'm in an area and I'm stuck there for a while. And so I might need to change a dressing on a regular basis. And then as well as kind of thinking about more kind of medical head scratching moments. So I've got a BP cuff and a stethoscope in there. I've got lots of kind of wound care stuff, as mentioned before. These SAM splints, I might bring those with me on certain trips, but they kind of live in here when I'm not using them on other trips. So a great example of when I might want to carry these SAM splints is when I'm mountain biking, because I find that's often when you're going to get kind of you're more likely to get injuries, especially wrist injuries. And because I'm mountain biking, I'm not carrying certain things that I carry in my other packs that I could use to splint. So sometimes I can make do with like an avalanche shovel handle as a splint, where when I'm mountain biking, I'm not carrying a lot of extra items. So the SAM splints are kind of nice to have. And then the other thing that I want to highlight is how I store my first aid supplies. And so this is where I have a very large milk crate. It's quite handy that it's red. That was just kind of a happy accident that I could find a red one. But what I have in here is all my extra items. So when I need to buy something, I like to just kind of buy a pack of them. So a great example of that is, I buy some triangular bandages. I put some in each of these kits. And then I've got, another 8 of them left in here, and they live inside this milk crate. So I've got my box of all my gloves. I've got a big bag full of other dressings, more tensor bandages, more wipes, roller gauze, all these kind of extras that I have so that when I do use my first aid kit, I go into this bin and I can resupply my first aid kits. But the other reason why I like to have this is a bit of a component of my earthquake kit as well. So at home, this is the essentially real at home first aid kit with all the extra supplies. And if for whatever reason there's a catastrophic event, like the big one that is always kind of threatened or discussed here in Vancouver, I've got a full kit of first aid supplies so that if something were to happen, I can kind of take care of not just my family, but my building and potentially the people on my street and my surrounding neighborhood as well. So that kit is something that I always try to keep relatively organized and up to date as well. So then that big first aid kit also lives inside of this duffel bag. And this duffel bag is not just kind of where I keep my big at-home first aid kit, but it's also where I keep a lot of my survival supplies. So I've got sacks of water in here. I've got these probably horrible tasting rations, some toilet paper, some hand sanitizer, candle. I've got survival blankets in here. I also keep a climbing helmet in here as well. Because if there is a situation like an earthquake, then the building that I'm in is probably going to be compromised. And so if I'm going to grab this, or I'm going to go back into my home to grab this stuff, there's a good chance that the stability of this building has probably been compromised. And so the helmet might come in handy as well. So now that you kind of have an idea of all these kind of first aid kits, now I want to go into a little bit more detail about what I keep in each of them. And before I get into that, though, one of the things that I don't keep in my first aid kit are small Band-Aids. And that stuff I keep in a separate kit. And so there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, small Band-Aids aren't really for a major emergency. Where that stuff comes into play, I find, is blisters. And so I've got in kind of this little kit that I keep in the top part of my backpack, I've got this blister kit right here where I've got my moleskin, some nail clippers, some wipes, some little foamies that I can kind of cut into donuts or create padding to relieve pressure on a blister. So that is one thing that you won't find in any of my first aid kits is kind of small stuff for blisters. And that's because I kind of consider that to be a very separate thing that I keep in kind of this emergency bag that I take with me in a bunch of different packs, whether I'm day hiking or I'm doing a multi-day trip. So let's start with the small personal kit. As you can see, I don't use a fancy bag for this. I'm really trying to minimize how much this weighs and how bulky this is. So I really want it to be as small as possible. So straight out of the gate, I've got gloves. Make sure those gloves are the right size and they fit you. I've got 2 triangular Band-Aids. This one is a much nicer linen triangular bandage. And if you've ever broken a collarbone or dislocated a shoulder and been in a triangular before, these ones are far more comfortable than these kind of cheapo cotton ones. But I do like to have 2 of them. So I kind of compromise by having this really nice one and then just one of these smaller ones. A couple big abdominal pads. So these are just large chunks of gauze. That's going to be really critical if you've got a deadly bleed. I've got some smaller pieces of gauze. This is for slightly minor wounds. I've got some roller gauze. I've got a tensor bandage. This is great for a number of injuries, wrists, ankles, knee injuries, that kind of stuff. I've got some antiseptic wipes for cleaning wounds. And I've got one of these CPR face masks. To be honest with you, these things aren't great. I kind of keep it in this kit to say that I have it. I would probably lean more towards avoiding something like this, or if in an emergency I can get my hands on a face mask, a proper face mask, I'd prefer that. But in a pinch, I at least have that. And then I've got a pair of scissors. These are kind of made to look like trauma shears. They're not going to cut through a lot. I keep a much bigger pair of trauma shears in my guiding kit. What these usually get used for is just cutting gauze or fitting things or cutting bandages, that kind of stuff. So they're really just there to have a small pair of scissors. And then on backpacking trips, it is nice to have a pair of scissors for cutting things like anything for blisters, repairing stuff. So it's just nice to have a small pair of scissors in there, but I'm not going to use these really to kind of cut through clothing, that kind of stuff. So that's my personal first aid kit that I take on any solo trips or when I go out with folks. The reason why it is kind of small is that when I go out with friends, my expectation is that each of them carries a small first aid kit. So then in combination, if we've got 3 or 4 people in our group, we should have 3 or 4 small first aid kits, and you kind of put them together and they're going to create a much larger first aid kit. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to show you is my guiding kit. Right out of the gate, I've got this tourniquet that I have just Velcroed on the outside. If I'm going on a personal trip, I might actually take that off and bring it with me along with my small first aid kit. This tourniquet is great for massive deadly bleeds. I thankfully have never had to use one, but in a situation that you need it, they are nice to have. You can certainly make tourniquets in the moment, but if you need a tourniquet, there's a fairly deadly situation, and so speed is kind of nice. And that's one of the reasons why it's just Velcroed right onto the outside of that kit. Now, for a guiding kit, this is it depends on the guide, but I would say this is probably a good size that you want. You can certainly have bigger kits, and on bigger expeditions, that's definitely something that is good to think about. And I work with a lot of colleagues that manage to kind of pare this down to an even smaller kit. But here's what I have. At the very top, I always like to keep my gloves, and I carry a lot more gloves in my guiding kit than I do in my personal kit, because obviously I'm dealing with strangers, members of the public, and we want to make sure that we've got that proper PPE with us. I've got kind of a small bag here with minor wound care items. So I've got some antiseptic wipes, some smaller bits of gauze. I've got some of that roller gauze that you can use to kind of hold on to those dressings. I've also got some of those triangular bandages like I have before. And then same thing, I've got kind of the cheaper cotton ones, and I've got one nice linen triangular bandage in there. This is just a syringe, and this can be really handy for irrigating wounds. So you can take some clean water and you can actually irrigate dirt or debris out of a wound. I've got some much larger dressings. So these are big abdominal pads. And because if I'm going into this bag, I'm dealing with a deadly bleed, I've got more gloves in that bag as well. A tensor bandage. And this is where I keep my big trauma shears. There's a lot of different trauma shears that you can get out there, but what I've kind of found is the ones that have the colorful handles as opposed to the black ones seem to be more durable, and you can actually cut through things. These are the ones that I had while I was a ski patroller, and I have cut through a ski boot with these, although that was very tough and you had to put a lot of muscle into it. You are capable of cutting some pretty significantly thick items. Other things that I keep in there, this is just some electrolytes, and kind of in that vein, I also carry this glucogel for any kind of diabetic incidences. In this kit, I only carry 2 bits of medication, 2 tablets of Benadryl for somebody who has an allergic reaction, and then 2 tablets of ASA or aspirin, and that's for somebody that has chest pains or is potentially having a heart attack. And so you want 2 81 milligram chewable ASAs, or not chewable ASAs, sorry, they chew them even if they aren't chewable, and that can potentially save somebody's life who's having a heart attack. I also have one of those face shields as well. This is just a couple pages that I've made of notes. Every time I recert my first aid, I always kind of use it as a chance to audit what I'm doing. And so I make those notes on here, and I'll kind of change these notes each time I recert my wilderness first aid. But those notes I have just kind of stuffed in my pack, and there's a bunch of different things in there. And I also keep a tick removal kit in here. And this one I got from the Canadian Lyme Disease Foundation. And it's got proper tweezers in there, as well as a tick identifying card and a little vial to kind of store the tick in. This is something that would come out of my pack in the winter months, but definitely in the spring, summer, fall months, I want to have that in my pack. We don't generally deal with a lot of ticks where I live, here in kind of North Vancouver in the Squamish Whistler area, although I have had one in Squamish. But definitely when I'm out in the Rockies or I'm elsewhere in the province, ticks are a little bit more of a concern. So that's something I like to have on me. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to show you is my little kit of various medication. I'm not giving these to clients very often. There's always kind of a balance that have to be made. Giving out medication to people is something that you need to be mindful of. And it's certainly something that they need to consent for. So oftentimes what I'm using this thing for is when I'm working in the backcountry or I'm recreating in the backcountry and I'm getting sick. I've got a bunch of different things that are in here. So, I've got, pseudoephedrine, which is a decongestant, ibuprofen, or Advil, acetaminophen or Tylenol. I carry Gravol as well as the non-drowsy ginger Gravol. I've also got Benadryl in there. And then last year, a doctor was very nice. He gave me some penicillin. So I've got some penicillin in there. And then I've also got a couple of aspirin tablets in there. And I've gone through a couple different iterations with how I kind of store this medication. And to try to save on space, I've just used an old kind of pill bottle in here. And it does make for a little bit of chaos. One thing that I have done is I've separated the aspirin. So I've got that aspirin, 81 milligram tablets. Again, that's for if somebody's having a heart attack. And so there's a real extreme emergency. And that's why I just keep those two tablets separate and in a little bag and at the very top. So if there is a situation where somebody appears to be having a heart attack, I can get that out very quickly and they don't get mixed in with the rest of the stuff. And one thing that makes this a little bit complicated is it's kind of just full of a bunch of different pills. And, it gets a little chaotic. You have to have a little bit of you got to know which pills are which and understand which each of them looks like. And that's where I have a little bit of a cheat sheet. So this is my log book that I use when I'm out in the field. And on the very last page, I have each of those medications. I have the dosage. I've got kind of a little description of what they look like. Sometimes that's me like doodling what the pill looks like. And then I've also got the expiration date of each of these bits of medication. And so that's my little kind of backpacking pill kit. And I don't take this on day trips, but on overnight trips, especially when you're deep in the backcountry and something goes wrong or you get an illness or a sickness. It's nice to kind of have that there with you. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you think I've missed anything. Let me know if you have any questions. And I'll include in the notes below kind of a breakdown of each of the things that I carry in these various kits. Well, thanks for watching and make sure you subscribe for more videos like this.